rides with non-functioning seat restraints, boats that flip over in waters unfit for swimming, and monorail trains just running along the tracks that happen to hit an unfortunate soul walking across them for a dare. These are just some of the documented ways that people, both guests and cast members alike, have passed away at Disney. But there's one ride with the prospect of something like this, plunging down an elevator shaft in the dark, is thrilling rather than dreadful: the Tower of Terror. Still though, the happiest place on earth had a genuinely terrifying experience for me on the ride, one I'll never forget, no matter how much I distance myself from the memory. The first time I encountered the Tower of Terror was through a DVD special my parents owned that detailed what Disney had to offer. I realize now it was more of a travel advertisement, encouraging people to spend money to go to the parks, but it was quite magical when I was a kid. The segment played into the spookiness of it all, and I was obviously intrigued. Apparently, the ride centered around the elevator of a deserted hotel on the dark side of Hollywood, and rumor had it you may become a permanent resident if that elevator dropped like it did all those years ago. I knew I wanted to go see this, so when I was 18, I managed to save up enough money for a big graduation trip with my best friend Sandra, or Sandy as we'll call her. We did everything together from the very moment we met in middle school, and so there was no one else I would rather experience my first adult trip with in my book. She was also a huge Disney fan, so the shoe fit. The only thing was, though, she was not a big horror fanatic like I was, so as much as I begged her, she refused to go on the ride, saying it would creep her out too much. Guess I would have to go alone. I didn't really mind after she said she'd wait in line with me though. That was something at least. Who knows, maybe my excitement and the urge of the recently graduated to go out of your comfort zone would change her mind by the time we got to the end of the line. The line for the ride, although incredibly long, really sold you on the idea of creepy hotel for Hollywood stars trapped in the Twilight Zone. Exposed steam pipes, machinery, cobwebs, and furniture straight out of the 1920s. If it weren't for the long line of people standing in short shorts and wearing several layers of sunscreen, I'd almost really believe I was standing in an abandoned hotel. My excitement was uncontainable, while Sandy was still trying to get over her jitters. She said she was warming up to the idea of going with me, but she'd have to see the elevator itself to make any final decisions. I said I was fine with that, and before we knew it, we were standing before the doors of the famed hotel elevator. It looked simple, with rusty divided silver doors and an ornate-looking floor dial at the top. The plaque read service elevator in bronze letters. I laughed while Sandy chuckled quietly. The doors opened with a rush of pressurized air. Inside the elevator were a few rows of seats. Finally, Sandy said, "Okay, I'll do it. At least it's not standing." We loaded in and we ended up at the back row, but that was fine with me. We had the middle seats with a good view of the action, so I wasn't worried about missing anything. Sandy held my arm tight as people squeezed in around us, and the ride was soon full of people and excited chatter. The theme for the Twilight Zone started playing, and a man sharply dressed in a red uniform closed the door for us. He ominously said goodbye in a sing-songy voice, causing Sandy to look at me with a nervous smile. I just patted her and whispered, "Don't worry, it'll be over before you know it." Then the ride began. The voiceover started and I grinned. My heart was pumping with anticipation. Lightning and thunder effects flashed around us. Sandy screamed and flung her arms around me. I stared as the specters bathed in white light greeted us from down that imaginary hall and vanished in a flash of electricity. This was going to be so damn fun. My eyes were riveted to the front the entire time. I don't think I looked at Sandy once, but I could hear her, or rather hear her lack of noise now. She let go of my arm at that point and was completely silent. I guess she was starting to enjoy herself, and that thought made me happy. She remained silent as we continued throughout the entire ride, even during the fated drop itself. Not even when we jolted up abruptly or back down did she speak at all. At that point, a lot of people were laughing and cheering, and I was too. I was so happy my best friend got to experience this with me, and I couldn't wait to talk about it with her afterward. And that wasn't the case, though. There's a quote from the Tower of Terror I think fits very well with what happened next. 5 people stepped into an elevator and into an abject nightmare. Only now it was 2 people, and I felt guilty one of them happened to be Sandy. As the lights turned on and the automated voice signaled us to step off, I turned to Sandy to say something like, "You make it all right?" I froze. She sat still as other people around us got up to exit, face streaked with tears. In fact, she was still quietly crying. It looked like she was trying with all her might to hold back screaming sobs. A few people looked at us with concerned looks as they walked by, but I shielded her and helped her off the ride, trying to console her as best I could. I was surprised at how shaken up she was. She wouldn't even tell me what was wrong. I made the executive decision to go back to our hotel. I gave her something to eat and gave her some water as well, and she took a very long shower. Just as I was about to knock and check up on her, she emerged from the bathroom in a burst of steam. We sat down on the bed, and although she'd stopped crying, she was still clearly shaken up as she explained what happened. The first part of the ride, where she had her arms wrapped around me, was completely fine. Eventually, though, she started to notice the man next to her looking at her instead of the ride in front of him. It wasn't long before he started trying to grope her, placing his hands all over her until she moved it away. It wasn't until he pulled a small, sharp object out of his pocket that she started to get really scared. The son of a bitch even whispered something into her ear like, "Don't move or I'll cut you." Sandy felt like she had no choice and silently sat there while the man essayed her right next to me. I hugged her, but inside my heart broke, and I felt ashamed I didn't notice what was happening. We went to Disney security and told them what happened, but since it was so dark, Sandy couldn't identify any features beside that they were an older man. They offered to look at the security cameras, but those yielded no results either. Ultimately, we decided to cut our trip short and stayed recovering in the hotel for the rest of the time. Sandy hardly left the room or her bed. I did my best to comfort her when she started having nightmares about the experience. I wish I could have stopped that man from doing what he did. I wish I hadn't begged her to go in the Tower of Terror with me at all. Maybe then the only nightmare would have been a haunted hotel. After college, I got a job working at the university's cafeteria as a dishroom worker and dining hall attendant. Basically 2 jobs, but paid the wage of a single one. Still though, it wasn't terrible work by any means. My co-workers were all very great, and I could survive off of it. It was just very long and repetitive. To get through my days, I thought of it as giving back to the community that had housed me for 4 years. That gave me some motivation when things started to get real dull. There was, however, one creepy incident at the start of this job that made me pause and wonder if I even wanted to continue working there. It involved one of my hiring managers/supervisors. Let's call him Weird Al. No relation to the parody artist, by the way. Weird Al was a tall, thin man who seemed nice at first glance. As I was only a 5'2" small woman, he crouched down a little to talk to me face to face whenever he needed to. He also showed me the ropes on my first day, when everyone else happened to be busy. It was only the second day when things started to get weird. He seemed to want to talk to me a lot more. That didn't really set off any red flags at the time, though. Given what I know now, the repeated attempts to be around me all the time come off a lot creepier. He opened up to me about his life as a single father with his daughter in a different country. I felt sympathetic and did my best to listen on my off time. Since my shift started at 7 in the morning and ended at 10 at night though, it very quickly became draining. He even offered to eat lunch with me, but I declined and went on my way. Now, the layout for the back kitchen can be pretty isolating. It's like a maze to navigate. You have the main room with all the different stations, mainline, deli, prep, etc. Then, off to the side, you have darkened storage rooms, the employee locker rooms, and finally, the dish room. That was a small space taken up by a huge washer/conveyor belt, with only one tiny window. When it was running, the machine was very loud, so Weird Al would need to get very close for me to be able to hear him, and vice versa. It started to get really weird when he would do this even when the machine wasn't running though. He never touched me or said anything inappropriate that day though, so I initially brushed it aside as him being kind of weird but ultimately harmless. Boy was I wrong. When I came into work the next day, it was just me and Weird Al who would be in the dish room that day. It started off like normal with the morning rush. Then it tapered off as the kitchen crew were setting out the dishes for the eventual lunch rush. We got backed up a little bit, so Weird Al didn't have as much time to chat that morning. He had to man the washing side while I manned the drying side. I was kind of glad to have some space to myself and got lost in the monotony of the work. Eventually, Weird Al tapped me on the shoulder. "So, I heard you were a really good writer." "Yeah, that was my major in college." He got this big grin on his face. "Maybe you could help me out a bit. You see, my daughter needs some help learning English. Maybe we could meet up and you could give her some lessons?" What? Now, I was kind of flattered, but I wasn't exactly an education or English major. I told him that, and that I knew people who would be much better equipped to handle that sort of thing. He wouldn't take no for an answer though, and persisted that I meet him and his daughter after work one night. I didn't know what to do. He was one of my superiors. Maybe. I'm pretty busy with my new apartment and all, you know. I left it at that. He seemed to take that as a yes though, and told me to tell him a time that would work for me by the end of the day. This is where I started to get a feeling in my gut. Something seems wrong here. Why would he recruit a random employee to teach his daughter English? Furthermore, in our chats the previous day, he'd already said his daughter was more or less bilingual and that he communicated with her regularly. Why did he lie about that? Why did he insist on getting so close to me and meeting after work hours? Couldn't this all be done over a video call if it was so pressing? No meeting in person necessary. I erred on the side of caution and avoided him as much as I could for the rest of the shift. At one point, he offered to give me a ride home because it was so dark out, but there was no way I wanted someone I'd only been working with for a couple of days to know where I lived, unless we were already friends or it was absolutely necessary. I refused to give him a time to meet either. I quickly packed up my stuff at 10 p.m. and slipped out the back door while he was going out the front. I walked across town to my apartment. The entire way there, I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anything. In fact, no one was out there all night. Not a car, not a pedestrian, not even a deer walking the streets. It was eerily quiet except for me. I had an uneasy sleep that night and was thoroughly raccoon-eyed when I came into work the next morning. I planned on avoiding him as much as possible again, and if he tried to be weird, I would speak to the on-site higher-ups. When I walked in the front cafeteria doors though, one of said higher-ups was already waiting for me, much to my surprise. She pulled me aside to her office and started saying things like, "Are you okay?" So on and so forth. I asked what this was all about, and her response shocked me. She told me delicately, "We've had complaints from a lot of female staff members that Weird Al's real name has been asking inappropriate questions. Since he worked with you yesterday, we wanted to cover bases. He's currently under investigation for human trafficking, so if you know anything, please tell us." I couldn't speak for a solid minute, but after the shock worked its way through my system, I told the higher-ups everything I knew. Him getting close and friendly with me, asking me to meet his daughter, about not taking no for an answer and offering me a ride home, everything. Now I was even more certain that everything he said about his daughter was complete bullcrap. He was just trying to get on my good side and get me alone to do God knows what to me, and who knows how many others had fallen for a similar routine. I consulted my roommate at the time to get her perspective on the whole thing. She nearly dropped her grocery bag she was holding when I told her the part about meeting Weird Al's daughter. Apparently, it was a common human trafficking scheme where she was from. Get the victim to trust you by meeting a child or another woman, then take them when they show up. I left that job a few months later for unrelated reasons, so I never found out what happened to him or if he was convicted. I'll never forget about it though, and now I'm more mindful of who tries to get close to me at work and for what reasons. When I, female, was in the 7th grade at 12 years old, I would experience nausea, vomiting, and extreme sleepiness after spending the night at the house of a particular friend. Let's call her Erin. This friend, also female, lived with her parents and her brother, who was 5 years older than all of us. After about 5 to 6 times of experiencing these symptoms, my mom apparently noticed a pattern and sat me down to ask if I was drinking alcohol at Erin's house. I remember laughing at that question because I'd never even tasted alcohol at that point in my life, but my mom was super serious about this. I told her no, and that I thought that it was Erin's multitude of rodent pets that were making me feel ill. This sounded suspicious to my mom, so she refused to let me spend the night at Erin's house anymore. I was still allowed to spend the night at my other friends' houses though. One night I was with a group of friends, and we had movie night at Erin's house, then went to spend the night at my friend Sarah's after, where I had slept over many times without any problems. The next morning I came home sick once again. Nausea, vomiting, extreme sleepiness. My mom decided to take me to the doctor to get checked out. She told the doctor she believed me when I said I didn't drink any alcohol, but given my hangover-like symptoms, apparently the doctor was incredulous and ran a blood alcohol test on me. It came back as 0. Surprise, surprise. The doctor said they could test my blood for GHB, but if I ingested the substance, it would no longer be detectable in the blood. Given the circumstances, he informed my mother privately that I was likely being drugged at Erin's house, since that was the only commonality preceding my symptoms. There wasn't enough evidence to show who drugged me though, or press any charges, so my mom just banned me from going there again. I stopped going to Erin's house completely, and I didn't experience any of those symptoms ever since. About 2 months after I stopped going, her older brother suddenly messaged me on Facebook one day and asked me why I never came around anymore. He told me he'd recorded some things on his DVR that I would like, so I should come over and watch them with him. I didn't know what to do, so I just deleted my Facebook altogether. I never told my parents about that message, but in hindsight, Erin's older brother was likely preying on me. So I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned onto it in the first place. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal, and of all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going in much deeper than me though, to the point he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt conversations and force the subject back to occult matters. It was obviously very rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It's a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women, and his world was kind of small. I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I tried my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off just because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on the PlayStation. Sometimes we'd go see movies, with my boyfriend accompanying us. We'd all hang out at the park together, go swimming. Overall, we had a very good time hanging out. Things started to go really downhill when he started to smoke DMT though. Personally, I believe psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they should be treated with the respect they deserve. My friend got to the point where he was making them himself and smoking daily multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, it's like you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence, where your body and yourself don't exist anymore. Like you're exploring an alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in a kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of different things. Just imagine what that can do to a person though, when they're doing it 30 plus times in a single day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently he had hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he was no longer on DMT. I was of course very alarmed to hear all of this. I told him he needed to take a serious break, no drugs at all for a few months so he could find solid footing in reality once more. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed help. Like I said before, B didn't exactly have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wouldn't be getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, so I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not sure if she took my messages seriously though, since we didn't know each other at all. Plus, she was 6 years younger than us and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start getting really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't that bad though, so we went anyway. We got to the park and he was his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made-up gods that only he knew the truth about. He also had this large knife he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He told us he had been using it in ceremonial magics that helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me or my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye to him then and there and move on. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck. Why do you think I want to spend any more time with this nutso?" My boyfriend was ignoring it, or it was not that effective. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat and the weirdo friend was in the back. As we were heading through a busy part of town where all the shopping and restaurants are, I heard the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. I peeked back out of the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. This crazy asshole was full-on jacking it in our back seat. I mean, pants all the way down, bare ass on the seat, beating it so hard he looked like he wanted to tear it off with his bare hands. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach. All the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped up into my head. I was trying not to shake and ignore it and drive through the heavy traffic. I kind of had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that big knife he had in his pocket and how obviously he was completely off his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. As nuts as it is, my boyfriend didn't seem to notice somehow. The whole time he kept on rambling about God knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were focused on driving and trying to ignore what was going on in my back seat. We got to the restaurant and my boyfriend ran inside to grab the food. I was left alone in the car with our friend. I tried to act like I was browsing on my phone, when in reality I was watching and listening as hard as I could. My boyfriend got back and I complained that I was tired. It had been a long day. I drove us back to our friend's car, and he didn't get out of our vehicle. He just kind of sat there. I had to get a bit rude and ask him to get out and go home. He got out of our car and walked over to his passenger side. I started getting really scared. I suspected the worst. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had in the seat and walked over to our car with it. I don't know why I did this, but I was so pissed I got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend we were obviously never hanging out with him again, and that I didn't even want to talk to him anymore. No contact at all. A few months passed, and he occasionally messaged me through PlayStation or texted my phone, said a lot of stuff, and I just ignored it. It turned out he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why exactly. He had a roommate, and I think their girlfriend lived there or something. I'm not sure about the situation. I thought maybe he was turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I still thought it was best to cut all contact and let him regroup a bit. I was not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needed help beyond what I could offer. I again reached out to his sister and let her know he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I got a call around 11 p.m. one night that woke me up. It was a man claiming he was a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skipped a beat. I started sweating and asked what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just left feeling lucky I didn't get shot last summer. The whole thing turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal and feeling kind of sick after writing all of this. My sophomore year of college was without a doubt my most miserable year of my 4-year stint yet. I lived with a roommate in the dorms whose living habits absolutely did not mesh with mine, and I was going through a severe bout of depression at the time, to the point where I was hardly going to class or keeping up with cleaning my half of the room. Combine that with the introduction of a global pandemic and being sent home before the spring semester was even finished because of it, and you have a recipe for absolute misery with the capital M. This incident takes place in the fall, though, when we were put through the thick of it really. I had a fight with my boyfriend one night at around 2 a.m. and thought it was a good idea to walk around the dorm building to clear my head. The dorm was 3 floors and we were located on the first floor with the student lounge. I decided to walk over to that area. After plugging my headphones in and wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, I walked down the brightly lit halls to my destination. I took my time trying to take my mind off the fight and read the different names on the doors. A lot of students also had these cute decorations put out, and they really served to cheer me up a bit. The student lounge was a huge space with windows lining the entire side of one wall that looked out onto the rest of the campus. At night, it served to look into a void of inky black, though. There was a TV and old fireplace at one end, and a piano, air hockey table, and board game station at the other. Couches, chairs, and desks were littered in the in-between. I often came here when I couldn't concentrate on projects or needed a break from my roommate. Overall, it was a real chill place to hang out. It also shared a wall with the CA office, so you could count on relatively no loud shenanigans, especially at night. It felt really warm in there. I was looking forward to snuggling up with my polar bear blanket and a good book for a while. It took me a minute to realize the lounge wasn't actually empty, though. A girl was sat down on one of the couches by the TV, shrinking backward into the seat as if trying not to be seen. Her eyes were wide, and she startled as she saw me. I recognized her as someone I'd seen around a few times, in a few of my classes too. Not exactly close friends, but we were friendly enough with each other. I approached and sat down in the chair next to the couch to talk to her. She said she hadn't slept well for a couple of days and was really stressed out. She couldn't go back to her dorm room, though. When I asked her why, she confided at me that someone had left a creepy note under her door. Whoever it was had written some cheesy line from Shakespeare about her being theirs forever, and to not be afraid of them, that they'd love her no matter what. I admit it was startling. I'd be creeped out if I received that note from someone I didn't know who they were. I felt bad for her and offered to let her sleep in my dorm room for the night so she'd feel more safe. She lived in a single room herself, so she had no roommate to rely on. She agreed and started crying with relief. We went back to my room together. My roommate was unhappy about being woken up, but she wasn't the type to turn down anyone who wanted to come over. I learned that firsthand, even if it meant at inappropriate times. Once she understood the situation, she welcomed the girl, who we'll call Jay, with open arms to sleep on our floor. We had an extra mattress, so it wasn't a big deal to either of us. Jay soon drifted off to sleep for what looked like the first time in over a week. In the morning, as we all got ready for class, a rarity around these parts, Jay thanked us profusely and asked if she could stay a few more days while she consulted the CA about her stalker. We said sure, thinking it would resolve itself eventually, and we wanted to support her. Long story short, though, it didn't quite go the way I expected it to. Jay divulged more about her stalking situation over the next couple of days, saying she'd been seeing a white truck almost everywhere she went that week, getting out of class, going to eat, even out her room window one night. That last one was when I found her in the lounge unable to sleep and scared out of her mind. That was definitely stalking behavior as far as we were concerned. My roommate walked her to class for the next week, and we all kept an eye out for more suspicious behavior. But there wasn't any. We thought the stalker had not found her yet, or must have backed off altogether. Jay was still scared, though, and slept in our room more often than not. She told the CA about what was going on, and was offered emergency housing, but strangely enough, she refused. That took me aback. I mean, I know people make questionable decisions under that kind of stress, but I know I would want to take the emergency housing where you'd have more consistent security than only friends. We accepted her decision though, and things went on like that for a month or so. My boyfriend visited in the middle of all of this. We'd made up from our fight at that point. When I told him what had been going on with Jay, he wanted to take action and find more evidence of this person to catch them. So, together with Jay, my roommate, and a lot of our friends, We made a group chat designed specifically to catch this person. In hindsight, it was less an investigation team and more a vigilante mob of onlookers, but we couldn't see that right away. Hindsight is 20/20, I suppose. That's when the drama really started, though. One night around 10 p.m., Jane messaged the group chat frantically telling us she'd seen the white truck again and that it left when she tried to get a good look. We needed to find it now while it was still in the area. We all rallied together and went out searching. Now, the college I went to was in a place that got a lot of snow, so it was no stranger to large trucks, and white trucks seemed to dominate the parking lots as we walked around. Jay came with us, and eventually we split up and inspected each white truck in different parking lots, going as far as to take pictures of license plates as well. She insisted that we keep looking, but it was getting quite cold and we weren't having any luck. We all decided to go home. My roommate and I brought Jay in tow with us once again and comforted her, saying we'd find this person soon enough. The CA knocked at our door the next day though, and she was not happy. She had several students making complaints about a mob chasing their cars outside, and someone had pointed to us as the ringleaders. We explained that that wasn't what we were doing at all. We were trying to catch Jay's stalker. She'd told her all of this before. That's when the CA dropped a bombshell on us. Jay had never told her about any of this. Not any note, not any white truck, any of what she'd said she had weeks ago. We were furious and ended up kicking her out of the room and banning her from the group chat. We explained to the rest of them that Jay had possibly been lying about the whole thing, or at least prolonged a single creepy experience to rile everyone up. We didn't know what to believe. We profusely apologized to the CA and anyone affected by our actions. Jay never talked to us again. Whenever I would see her around campus, she'd look away or pretend not to notice us at all. We never heard from her again after we all went home due to COVID either, and we all wrote off the whole experience. I hope she's doing well today and hasn't experienced any more stalkers, but for her sake, I hope she never tries something like that ever again. My girlfriend and I were months away from being parents for the first time. We were both working jobs as well. I worked in retail as a key holder. She was working as an assistant manager at a place in the local strip mall. After my shift one day, I took the deposit bag, wrapped it up in my work clothes, put all of that in another bag, and went to walk the 5 or so minutes to my girlfriend's work. Just before I got to the door of the mall though, a random man came up and asked me if I could help him start his car. Apparently he needed to get to work quite badly, but he couldn't do it himself. Now, growing up, my family did have cars like that. So I said, damn air intake or whatever, and said I'd help him. We walked around the corner of the mall to where his car was sitting. So that's the car I'm gonna help start, I thought to myself. So we just need to get in and I'll drive you to my car I need help starting, the man said. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately began to rise. I have ignored gut instincts before. That's how I'm with this girlfriend at this time, actually. But this is a sensation that was very clear. It was telling me ignore these physiological warnings at your own certain peril. I quickly explained to him that I thought this was going to be a very quick thing, and I had somewhere I needed to be right away. I was already quite late. I apologized and started walking quickly away from him. I watched him leave in his car before going to my girlfriend's workplace. I told her we were going to scrap our plans for dinner and go home ASAP, dropping the deposit bag off on the way. As we were crossing the parking lots to head to the bank in a roundabout way, we could clearly see the same man. For being apparently in a hurry to get to work, he was really slowly driving around the Target parking lot, just randomly scoping people out. There's no doubt in my mind, I would have certainly regretted getting into a car with that man that day. In fact, there's a good chance I wouldn't even be able to type out this story for you to read. Okay, so first of all, I think I should put a brief trigger warning. Nothing too bad happens, but it's enough to make some people uncomfortable, so take caution when listening to this. Anyway, I was 15 and had just transferred into a new school. I made a friend immediately, and after a few weeks, I asked my mom. She agreed to let me spend the night. I'm not going to give out my friend's real name, obviously, so let's just call her Kelsey. Anyway, I get to Kelsey's place, and it's all fun and games. I met her mom, who I absolutely adore, and even managed to make a few jokes with both her parents, even though her dad seemed more partial to just grunting. Around 10, we both got sleepy, and since I have a horrible memory, I didn't remember to bring something to sleep with. I borrowed a shirt from Kelsey that went down to my knees. We also slept together in the same bed. I know it probably was not a good idea to just be wearing a shirt, with understuff of course, to a sleepover, but I trusted my friend completely, and she was wearing something similar anyway. We both passed out. I was suddenly awoken sometime later though, because I could feel the blanket now moving around. I turned my head and saw a shadowy figure. I could just barely make it out to be her dad. He stepped away from the bed and dropped the blanket. I blinked in his direction twice in confusion, then instantly fell asleep again. That might be dumb, but I was dead tired, and I was too sleepy to be properly alarmed. I felt the same thing happen a short while later, after I fell asleep again though. This time, I didn't move around too much as I looked closer, and verified that yes, it was my friend's father. He was lifting up the blanket of the side I was sleeping on. My thighs were exposed because my shirt had ridden up when I slept. I sat up in place, scaring him away from the blanket yet again. It took it happening twice, but now I caught on to what was going on, and to say I was scared is an understatement. I had a lot of stuff going through my mind. Potential horrible ways this was going to end. I made sure the blanket was wrapped around my legs and still acted sleepy because I didn't want him to know how aware I was. He moved away from the foot of the bed and stood next to the TV. He started telling me some BS story that he was just there to turn it down or whatever. I just went with it. He stood there for multiple minutes on end, just waiting to see if I would lay back down again. If I was even thinking about it, the fact that he was waiting on it would have stopped me. Thankfully, he left the room. I grabbed my phone and tried my hardest to call my parents, but they didn't answer. It was like 3 a.m. after all. As I was trying to reach them, I noticed that he'd never really left the space in front of Kelsey's door. He was still standing there, waiting for me to fall back asleep. I noticed him poking his head back into the room every few minutes to check if I was still awake or not. At that point, I felt sick. I was the most terrified I'd ever been in my life because I suddenly realized we were the only 2 people awake in the house. I went on to Snapchat just to contact people and not feel so isolated. I could have woken up Kelsey, but I didn't. I was too scared, and I didn't want to lose my first friend, so I didn't bother to wake her up. I just stayed awake on my phone all night until she eventually woke up too. I made her come with me to the bathroom because I was so scared. If you're curious, I did tell her what happened. She begged me to tell her mom, and I did even though I didn't want to. Her mom then came home with me and refused to leave until I told my mom. Together, they managed to kick him out of the house, and Kelsey is still one of my closest friends to this day. I'm immensely grateful to the fact that I'm a light sleeper. The only thing that woke me up those 2 times was because I could feel the blanket being lifted off me. It's such a small thing, but I'm so lucky it woke me up. I'm sure he would have done a lot worse than look if it hadn't been for that. I had gotten out of an 8-year-long abusive relationship and met someone on a popular online dating app. To be honest, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to go to watch a movie with or have a drink with every now and then. I had 2 boys and I was happy and living a peaceful life on my own after going through hell. I met this guy who was just a couple years older than me, and he had turned his life around. When he was younger, he used to be in gangs and drugs, and now he was into working out and staying fit, doing family stuff. I guess you could say I felt protected by him. He was a hard worker, self-sufficient, had a son, and loved going to the gym every day. I myself had kind of a crazy past but overcame it as well, so we seemed like a good fit. We would go to dinner and movies, normal dating stuff. Eventually, he wanted to spend more and more time together, and I was having trouble giving up all my free time for him. He would get angry about this, like really angry. After being with a controlling, possessive asshole for so long, this was obviously a red flag, and after 3 months, I told him I didn't want to see him anymore. He said he needed to confess something to me. He admitted that he was using steroids, and that was the reason for his mood swings. He cried and said he was sure that was the reason, and he was willing to stop if it meant he could have another chance. I obliged, but only under the condition that we remain friends. Things were okay for a while. We saw each other maybe every other week, and he started wanting to see me every week. I told him I was not interested in being anything other than friends at the moment, since I was not ready for a relationship. He tried to talk me into giving him another chance, but I just didn't find myself interested in him in a romantic way. I insisted we'd just be friends. I stopped talking to him because I got mad at his insistence that we talk every day, since he said that's what friends do. He would always ask for my whereabouts and ask for pictures of who I was hanging out with. I told him that's absolutely not what friends do. He kept insisting he just innocently wanted to see what I was up to. Fast forward 6 months later, and I hadn't spoken to him at all within that time. I was happy and living my life. On one particular night when my youngest son was at his dad's, I went out to a local bar with some friends. My oldest son, who was 13 at the time, was home alone, so I left a little early to make it home around 10. I laid down in bed and went to sleep. A little info on my living situation. I had been living in my condo for almost a year now, and we lived in a great safe community. I would leave my patio sliding glass door open with the screen closed to let a breeze in at night. No big deal. My bedroom was close to the patio, and my son would sleep in the loft that was closest to the front door. I was dead asleep when I suddenly felt someone slowly sit on my bed. I was laying there wondering why my son would come sit on my bed so slowly. He wouldn't. I turned around and it was not him. It was Mario, not his real name obviously, laying down in bed next to me. I sat up and asked him how he got in. He was not answering me. He simply said, "I needed to talk to you." Okay, when you need to talk to someone, you don't sneak into someone's room. You call them, you leave a note for them, literally anything but this. I was thinking I was gonna kill my kid for letting him in. I didn't have your number anymore. I needed to talk to you before it's too late. I didn't even entertain the before it's too late bit because I was livid, but something told me to keep my cool right now. I sat up and said, "Look, I really want to talk to you too, but not like this. Please just leave and I promise we'll talk tomorrow. Call me tomorrow, okay?" He got up and walked over to my side of the bed. He started rubbing his shoulders and slowly making his way to my neck. "Do you really want to talk?" I looked him in the eyes and said, "Yes, I've been wanting to talk to you, but not like this. Please call me tomorrow, okay?" He stared at me while rubbing my neck, then went back down to my shoulders and let go. This motherfucker then proceeded to exit through my patio door. He jumped my patio wall, which told me exactly how he got in. I freaked out and checked on my kid. He had no idea what was going on. I locked all my doors and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I texted him, and I told him that if I ever saw him near me or in my complex, I would call the police and to never contact me again. If you're wondering why I didn't call the cops to begin with, I knew he had a gun, so I was scared of being retaliated against for being a snitch. I also figured if I called the cops, they wouldn't do much, or they'd just let him out. I was afraid of what he would do after. Either way, he left me alone, and I didn't hear from him for years. 4 years later, I'm going through Facebook, and I see his face in People You May Know. I click on the picture and notice it looks a lot like a jail picture. You know, those pictures where the guy is clearly in a jail cell. I scrolled down the page. His most recent post was him posting his address for his family members to write to, a prison address. I googled his name, and sure enough, articles after articles, all with the same headline: Man arrested on suspicion of killing girlfriend. About 2 years after he and I dated, he shot and killed the girl he was dating. That could have easily been me. I feel like shit thinking if there was anything I could have done to stop him. Even scarier thought, though, is that he only got 12 years for her cold-blooded murder.